The next thing we're going to talk about is JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it's a way of sharing data. It's a way of structuring our data that is independent of the programming language itself. And so in this case, we have JSON that is based on the car example we used earlier, and the notable difference that we'll see is that now our key value pairs have changed slightly. Our keys have quotations around them, and these quotations make the data serialized. So they're just raw strings rather than being properties that only JavaScript might understand. And the benefit of using this serialized JavaScript object notation is that it allows any other programming language to read and digest our data into objects or variables that it understands. So for instance, a Java program that's a completely different language than JavaScript could read in this JSON and quickly see, okay, this key, this field here has this value Chevy, so maybe I want to store it in this make variable and give it a value of Chevy. But it's all up to the individual programming language that digests this. However, like I said, the structure, the simplistic structure of JSON makes it extremely easy to digest. So one application of JSON that's becoming increasingly popular in terms of web applications and even mobile applications is to use JSON to pass data from servers to clients or even other servers through the form of something called RESTful APIs. And we're going to go to our browser to a really cool tool on the web to explore RESTful APIs a little bit more. But take a minute to take note of this JSON and really understand that it's very similar to JavaScript objects that we learned about in a previous section, with the only exception that now all the data is serialized, and so it's kind of independent of the JavaScript language itself. And this is that really cool web-based tool that I was talking about. It's called apig.com, and it allows us to ping the APIs of different really popular websites from across the web. And we can ping things like Google Analytics, Heroku, MailChimp, New York Times, Twitter, and some others. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to ping the LinkedIn API. And I've already gone and authenticated myself as my LinkedIn user, but when you come here, if you haven't authenticated, you'll have the option between NoAuth and OAuth 2. Select OAuth 2 and it'll prompt you to actually authenticate yourself according to your LinkedIn profile. Anyways, what we're able to do with this is make a request to the LinkedIn API. Now you may be wondering what an API is, and it simply stands for Application Programming Interface. It has different meaning depending on what type of program or language or scenario we're dealing with, and so in that sense it's a pretty generic term. But in the case of web-based applications and mobile-based applications that ping data from across HTTP requests, it refers to a request made across the web through HTTP or HTTPS that returns some raw data, either in the form typically of XML, which is kind of a more rudimentary version of HTML, or JSON. JSON is becoming the increasingly popular form of data transfer across the web, and we'll see exactly how that looks by making a request on the LinkedIn API. So I'll go ahead and select to retrieve basic profile data, and it'll give me some options in terms of parameters, and I'm going to leave the default parameters, which is to format the response as JSON. Then when we click send, it'll make that request to the LinkedIn API, and it'll provide the response from the API. It'll tell us what the request is that we made, and we'll talk about this a little bit later when we discuss Angular and Firebase in our next class. But what I really want to pay attention to for our purposes in this video is the response. And this information right here is just information about the response itself, but down here we can actually see the data that the response provided us, and we'll see that it's in JSON format. It's in this serialized JavaScript object notation format, which makes it really easy for us to pull this data into our web application and do things with it. And actually in the next video, in the next section, we're going to take some of the data, some of that JSON data we created in our own file, and use it to populate some views in our HTML and actually manipulate the DOM to provide a user experience that's done totally from JavaScript.